when a conceited billionaire woman arrogantly challenged a black janitor, stating, "If you can play that piano, I'll marry you," she was completely unaware of the profound impact her words would have. That evening was destined to become the most astonishing experience of her entire existence. New York glowed with vibrant lights that night. Outside the Witmore Grand Hotel, bright spotlights swept across the red carpet, while cameras flashed incessantly like bursts of fire. Inside the grand hall, ornate crystal chandeliers cast a radiant golden glow over the polished marble floors, as guests in elegant evening gowns glided past each other, exchanging meticulously practiced smiles. It embodied a quintessential high society fundraising event where tales of generosity flowed as effortlessly as the champagne, and the individuals whose hands had meticulously cleaned the floors since early morning seemed to disappear completely from view. Marcus Reed maneuvered his cleaning cart along a secluded side corridor. The rags on his cart were folded with the same precise care he had maintained throughout his 5 years of employment there. He intimately understood the unspoken rules of this environment. This included the cool, brief nods, the glances that consistently bypassed his eyes and looked over his shoulder, and the subtle ways people would shift their footsteps to avoid appearing in the camera's lens. A public relations staff member, clutching a clipboard, walked past and slightly tilted her chin, stating, "Let's ensure staff remain outside the camera frame." "Thank you." Her tone was neither harsh nor overtly impolite. It was simply delivered as if it were an undeniable fact of nature, as though the spotlight was exclusively meant for a select group of individuals. At the commencement of his shift, his manager had instructed him, "Marcus, use the service elevator, friend. Do not traverse the main hall while guests are being photographed." The casual use of friend felt cordial yet distant, a way to avoid acknowledging the gleaming Marcus displayed on his name badge. A security guard happened to walk in the same direction, his gaze not overtly hostile, but clearly disciplined, constantly scanning, preempting, and observing. Marcus politely presented his staff identification card with a pleasant smile. The guard nodded briefly and continued walking, but when Marcus navigated the periphery of the main hall to collect a few empty glasses, the distinct sound of black dress shoes followed him closely for several moments. On a small elevated platform at the far end of the vast room rested a Steinway & Sons Model D piano, motionless and elegantly poised like a promise waiting to be fulfilled. Its polished black surface captured the light from the chandeliers above, fragmenting it into countless tiny, shimmering stars. Marcus paused his movements, not out of exhaustion, but because a forgotten memory briefly resurfaced within him. He recalled the distinct aroma of polished wood and the cool, smooth sensation of ivory keys beneath his fingertips. He then consciously turned his gaze away from the instrument. He was present there to perform his cleaning duties, not to play a musical instrument. The gathered crowd flowed continuously around him. A distinguished society woman abruptly stopped when Marcus inadvertently stepped too close to the edge of the camera's view. "Excuse me. Please go around," she instructed. A man then gestured with a subtle wave of his hand. "Hey, Keith." Marcus turned to face him. "Yes, sir. My name's Marcus," he replied. The man extended a set of car keys, gesturing towards the hotel's main entrance. "Where's the valet?" he asked. "Sir, I am a member of the maintenance staff. The valet service is located at the front entrance," Marcus explained. The man emitted a flat sound and allowed his gaze to slide off Marcus's face, as if it had encountered an unyielding pane of glass. Marcus was accustomed to such reactions. In this environment, successfully remaining unnoticed was an essential survival tactic, which involved moving deliberately along the carpet's edge, skillfully avoiding the gaze of cameras, circumnavigating large columns, and always ensuring he was the last person to pass through a doorway so that no one would need to step aside for him. Occasionally, someone nearby would murmur, "You don't belong here." This comment was never directed at him personally, but rather seemed to be spoken vaguely into the air, intended for his passing form. He diligently collected used glasses, replaced overflowing ashtrays, and wiped the edges of various tables. Another public relations assistant rushed past, meticulously adjusting a decorative backdrop. "Staff, kindly remain outside the designated photo line," she instructed. Understood, Marcus responded, his voice as devoid of inflection as the freshly polished floor beneath his feet. Gloria Johnson, the experienced veteran housekeeper, passed by him and gently placed a packet of tissues on his cleaning tray. Marcus, take a break. Have some water, she suggested kindly. I'm fine, Miss Gloria, he assured her. She regarded him for a moment longer, as if she wished to impart something significant, but understood that it was not the appropriate time or place within the bustling, crowded hall. From the grand entrance doors, a new group of guests entered, moving within a carefully choreographed display of flashing lights. They smiled, cameras flashed, they turned, and more flashes occurred. Fingers gracefully touched the champagne glasses. Victoria Whitmore herself emerged last from the group, her vibrant red silk gown catching the light in a manner that made it appear like a sculpted, flickering flame. Diamonds shimmered along her collarbone and wrist. She strode confidently towards the microphone, her voice resonating with a firm and bright clarity, much like polished glass. We are gathered here tonight, she began, to collectively remind each other that hope invariably holds a rightful place. I trust that each of you will demonstrate your generosity. The ensuing applause was polite and reserved, its sounds seamlessly blending with the rich scent of expensive perfumes and the delicate effervescence of champagne foam. The same security guard continued to subtly follow Marcus as he diligently kept to the periphery of the hall. No explicit instruction had been given for this surveillance. It simply occurred as an intrinsic part of a collective, unthinking reflex. As Marcus bent down to retrieve an empty glass, he caught a glimpse of his own reflection in a nearby wall mirror. It showed his navy uniform shirt, his black gloves, and the calm, yet subtly strained eyes that had seen many years of this work. On the opposite side of that reflective surface, there existed a perfectly presented narrative of benevolence and charitable acts. On his side of the glass stood the man whose labor polished those very narratives until they gleamed. A young female guest, holding her phone, paused exactly where Marcus was standing. Sorry. Could you please move? She inquired, without bothering to glance at his name tag. Yes, ma'am. My name's Marcus. I'll step aside, he replied. His name, articulated softly, seemed to vanish unheard amidst the faint strands of background music, which were so light as to be almost imperceptible. He stopped near the edge of the stage, methodically scanning the meticulously arranged tables. Napkins were folded with perfect precision, the glass count was accurate, and the ashtrays were less than half full. Another security guard approached him, offering a polite smile. Sir, this designated area is exclusively for our guests, he stated. Yes, I will be out shortly, once I have completed checking the glasses. Thank you, Marcus responded. The guard's smile was not overtly unfriendly. It simply possessed a thin, underlying layer of inherent suspicion. From the microphone, the public relations host announced the evening's meticulously planned schedule, a series of speeches, followed by an art auction, and then a special piano performance by a featured guest artist. Marcus again cast a brief glance at the majestic Steinway piano. From somewhere deep within his memory, the voice of his old music teacher whispered to him, "Don't just count the keys. Truly feel the music." He subtly shook his head. Here, his emotions were not part of his designated duties. His primary function was to remain invisible. A couple walked past him, and the man, squinting slightly, called out, "Hey buddy, there's a spill over there." Marcus turned. "Yes, I'll attend to it right away," he said. He moved like an insubstantial shadow across the polished marble floor, every movement meticulously calculated to appear smaller than the vast room itself. His shoulders were lowered, his elbows kept tucked close to his body, and he stood at a slight angle, always ready to yield the path to others. He had mastered the art of existing like a subtle ripple, present everywhere yet seemingly absent from every visual frame. Occasionally, a sharp pang of longing would strike him. This happened when the piano was being tested, with 3 scattered chords played or someone briefly pressing the pedal. The sound was rich, resonant, and deeply evocative, recalling countless nights he had spent seated at a piano until his fingertips became numb, striving to place a particular melody precisely where it belonged within the grand score of his life. Now, that cherished melody lay concealed behind a door he himself had deliberately locked. The key, he mused, was likely lost somewhere along the arduous journey of becoming an individual whom no one felt the need to acknowledge. "Marcus, stick to your service route," the manager reminded him, his eyes briefly flicking towards the corner where donors were posing for photographs, their smiles carefully arranged. "Do not cross the main hall." "Yes, sir," Marcus affirmed. He turned his steps towards the service elevator. At the narrow intersection of two corridors, he paused, not from physical exhaustion, but to silently swallow something undefinable, something that weighed heavily within him. Then he continued on his way. The gala was proceeding with seamless precision, like a perfectly synchronized machine. Speeches commenced exactly on cue. Applause erupted in all the correct places, and cameras were positioned at precisely the right angles. The pervasive atmosphere of invisibility operated with equal smoothness. Staff members utilized the designated back routes, their individual names fading into generic labels such as Buddy or You, while the expressions in the eyes of guests constantly served as a reminder, you do not belong here. Every single element fit impeccably into the dazzling, polished machinery of the event. Only Marcus, in a fleeting instant before the service door quietly closed behind him, cast a final glance back at the magnificent Steinway piano. The radiant light from the chandelier cascaded over the piano's surface, pooling into a serene, subdued glow. He exhaled softly, a gentle sigh, as if depositing a small, smooth stone into a tranquil river. Then, he pushed his cart inside the elevator, and the door closed noiselessly behind him, with the quiet swiftness of a blink. Dignity possesses no prescribed uniform, it is solely defined by courage. The service elevator door had barely closed with a soft click behind him when Marcus immediately steered his cleaning cart back towards the periphery of the main hall, intending to collect the final few empty glasses before the speeches were set to commence. Everything was proceeding precisely according to the meticulously planned schedule, and he was keenly aware that even a minor disruption in the flow of events could irrevocably alter the entire atmosphere of the room. A public relations woman, clipboard clutched firmly in her hand, swept past him, speaking as if addressing the very air itself. "Remember, ensure staff remain outside the photo line." Across the expansive room, a security guard instinctively mirrored Marcus's movements, without requiring any explicit orders. Within the bright, circular beam of the camera's spotlight, Victoria Whitmore stood poised, as if she were the immutable, fixed point on a meticulously drawn graph. Her vibrant red silk gown clung flawlessly to her figure, and the diamonds she wore caught the light with dazzling intensity, her smile meticulously calibrated to the perfect angle. Within her mind, a lengthy mental checklist of potential risks continuously scrolled. A major shareholder potentially irritated by last week's labor lawsuit, the presence of an unpredictable journalist that very night, and a crucial new donor who required careful wooing. The intricate outline of her speech, the precise camera angles, who was to stand with whom, and, crucially, what absolutely must not occur. She knew every detail by heart, as intimately as she knew her multiplication tables. What she had entirely failed to account for, however, was the unpredictable human element that lay beyond the confines of her meticulous plan. Marcus knelt on one knee, reaching deep under a table to retrieve a glass that had rolled far out of sight. He straightened up just as Victoria turned away from a camera, casually flicking her wrist. Champagne splashed out in a shimmering golden streak, landing directly across her vibrant red silk gown. A breathless second passed, filled with an almost palpable tension, before the entire room's attention collectively shifted. All eyes converged on the scene, and numerous phones began to lift into position, ready to capture the unfolding drama. "What the hell are you doing?" Victoria's voice pierced the air, sharp and brittle like shattering glass. Marcus carefully placed the retrieved glass onto his tray, straightened his posture, and opened his hands in a gesture, as if attempting to calm the suddenly agitated atmosphere of the room. "I'm sorry, ma'am." Sorry, she sharply interrupted him. "You have stained this expensive dress," Victoria exclaimed. Do you possess any comprehension of its monetary value? The query was not intended to elicit a factual answer. Instead, it served to precisely quantify the vast disparity between an individual who inherently feels entitled to issue demands and another who fundamentally requires explicit permission merely to exist. A businessman present in the room smirked knowingly. No ordinary janitor could possibly afford to cover even a minor blemish on that particular dress, he remarked. Laughter rippled spontaneously through the gathering crowd. Another voice, loud enough to be clearly audible throughout the room, added, "Individuals such as yourself should consistently remain in the background." The security guard, positioned nearby, took a subtle step closer to Marcus, not in an overtly threatening manner, but simply standing in place like a conclusive period at the termination of a pointed accusation. Marcus maintained an even, steady tone in his voice. "I can cover the dry cleaning bill, ma'am," he offered. He was acutely aware that his words were as flimsy as a piece of tissue paper. A full month's worth of his wages would be entirely insufficient to cover even a fraction of a boutique's invoice for such an item. For Victoria, the accumulated weariness stemming from a life perpetually confined within a stringent cage of expectations condensed into an automatic, instinctive reflex to reassert her absolute control over the situation. She partially turned, skillfully drawing the entire room's attention back towards herself. "How about this?" she proposed, her voice cold and cutting, yet simultaneously bright, like a clear command designed to redirect the crowd's focus. A brief moment of silence hung in the air, then the room erupted in a cacophony of voices and laughter. Someone playfully quipped, "Be careful, there are more white keys than black." Another offered, "A few token she's," but eyes still kept smiling. The seemingly innocuous joke effortlessly slid into a pre-existing mental groove, neatly encapsulating racial undertones within the guise of humor, thereby avoiding the necessity of explicitly naming it. Standing at the periphery of the gathering, Gloria Johnson instinctively tightened her grasp on the packet of tissues she held. She first looked at Marcus, then her gaze shifted to Victoria. She immediately recognized that particular expression on Victoria's face, the look of someone who had never in their life been compelled to question whether they were truly permitted to occupy the space they stood in. "There's no need to sensationalize this. It's merely a small accident," a woman attempted to interject, but the multitude of cameras remained resolutely raised, still recording. Marcus could have easily retreated into the service hallway, as he always did, thereby becoming a mere void for the wave of attention to effortlessly glide past. Yet, on this particular night, something deep within him adamantly refused to yield or withdraw. "I do not require you to marry me," Marcus stated, his eyes unwavering and his voice low yet distinctly clear. "However, if I succeed in doing so, I fully expect you to uphold your word." A few scattered chuckles emerged from the crowd, testing the seriousness of his declaration. Victoria arched an elegant eyebrow, still attempting to reel the unfolding moment back into the realm of a light-hearted jest. "Perfect. Show us, buddy," she said, deliberately emphasizing the word buddy as if it were a dismissive stamp. It was yet another subtle way to avoid addressing him by his actual name. "Let's make it a wager," a guest enthusiastically called out. "500 if you can play the entire musical piece without making a single mistake. 1,000 if you manage to sustain it for more than 30 seconds. Money began to appear and flick from various wallets across the room. That unrestrained excitement, untainted by genuine empathy, allowed them to vociferously cheer without having to confront the uncomfortable reality that they were actively instigating and fueling a blatant public humiliation. The public relations woman quickly glanced at Victoria. A brief frown creased Victoria's brow for a second, then a thin, artificial smile appeared. If the incident were framed correctly, the resulting video clip had the potential to significantly amplify their audience reach. Within Victoria's strategic mind, calculations of goodwill credits, audience engagement metrics, and potential headline impact flickered rapidly. She had been rigorously trained to quantify every aspect of her life in numerical terms and had, in the process, utterly forgotten how to measure value in terms of human beings. Marcus gently shook his head when the various banknotes were extended towards him. "I am not accepting your money," he stated firmly. "Then what is it that you desire?" a voice from the crowd demanded. "Just one thing," Marcus replied. "If I successfully perform, you will be compelled to remember every single word you just uttered in front of everyone present here tonight." A subtle, thin pause permeated the air. Victoria then laughed, this time more expansively. She remained confident that she still retained full ownership of the unfolding narrative. "Deal," she declared. "There are plenty of witnesses here tonight." She gestured towards the stage. "That piano," she continued, "the entire city is poised to witness your performance." The security guard walked in parallel with Marcus, effectively escorting what he perceived as a moving, potential risk. David Shin, the esteemed music critic, stood perfectly still, like a carefully placed comma in a sentence, intently observing how a mere smirk could profoundly redefine a person's entire existence. He first looked at the Steinway, then his gaze shifted to Marcus, his eyes flickering with a nascent anticipation. "Come on," someone in the crowd urged, their smile thin and sharp as a blade. "Don't keep us waiting." Lots of white keys. More laughter, loud but conspicuously cold, echoed through the hall. Victoria meticulously adjusted her gown. For a fleeting fraction of a second, her gaze briefly met Marcus's, not perceiving him as a sentient individual, but rather as a mere prop, to be coolly assessed for its utility. Deep within her, the underlying fatigue lingered, the burden of urgent emails, demanding early morning meetings, and relentless shareholder pressure. However, she had deliberately chosen to channel that exhaustion into a raw display of power, and power unchecked invariably gravitated towards the lowest available surface onto which it could unleash itself. Marcus took a deep breath. He carefully placed his cleaning tray onto the nearest table, then removed his gloves, folding them neatly. All the ingrained habits of making himself appear smaller than the vast room itself, he performed them one final time before stepping into the open space, illuminated by the expectant eyes and recording cameras that were eagerly awaiting his inevitable downfall. "After you," Victoria said, her voice smooth but chillingly devoid of warmth. "Time to prove it, buddy." The room swelled with an audible ooh of excited anticipation. At the very edge of the crowd, Gloria Johnson gave the smallest, almost imperceptible shake of her head. Only Marcus registered it. David Shin stepped half a pace forward, his hand resting casually in his suit pocket, ready to witness genuine ability, not just another spectacle. Marcus began to walk. The faint sound of his shoes on the marble floor was barely audible, yet each deliberate step he took seemed to subtly recalibrate the room's entire center of gravity. At the terminus of his walk, the sleek black Steinway & Sons Model D piano lay motionless, its polished lid capturing the chandelier's light and transforming it into its own intimate, private sky. The laughter had not entirely subsided. It still lingered here and there, falling sporadically like late-season hail, but beneath the lingering noise, a subtle silence began to materialize, a space just expansive enough for music, should it choose to emerge. Marcus placed a hand gently on the edge of the stage. The security guard stopped precisely at the perimeter, choosing not to advance further. The public relations woman took a half step back, her camera still actively recording. Victoria maintained her chin held high, utterly convinced that she still commanded complete control of the unfolding moment. But for the very first time that evening, Marcus made no attempt to diminish his presence. He simply stood at the full, dignified stature of a man. "My name is Marcus," he announced, his voice carrying clearly enough for those in the front rows to hear. "Not Buddy." He then stepped confidently onto the wooden riser, moving towards the piano with the deliberate manner of an individual approaching a genuine, meaningful conversation rather than a mere sideshow performance. From that pivotal instant, the entire atmosphere of the night irrevocably shifted, and the audacious marriage dare, which had initially sounded like a flippant jest, began to solidify into a binding, serious promise in the presence of a room filled with numerous witnesses. What was about to transpire would no longer be mere entertainment. It would undeniably become a profound test of dignity, inherent talent, and the unwavering power of one's spoken word. Immediately following Marcus's calm, resolute declaration, "My name is Marcus, not buddy, the ambient noise level in the room seemed to perceptibly decrease. He continued walking, each deliberate step on the polished marble floor even and measured. Neither fast nor slow, his pace suggested he was methodically recalibrating his own inherent dimensions within a space that had never been intended to truly accommodate him. A stack of banknotes was pushed forward, accompanied by the distinct snap of wallets being opened. 500 if you play a full piece. 1,000 if you don't run off in 30 seconds. The air vibrated with a clean excitement. They felt at liberty to fully enjoy themselves without having to consciously acknowledge that they were actively cheering for an act of public humiliation. Marcus did not even glance at the money. "I am not here to perform like a trained pet," he stated. "I am not accepting your bets." He then turned directly towards Victoria, the individual who had issued the challenge. "I accept," Marcus affirmed, "and I require only one thing. If I succeed, Miss Whitmore will honor her word in front of everyone present here tonight." A couple of whistles rang out, a mix of mocking undertones and genuine testing. Victoria Whitmore subtly lifted her chin, her smile hardening into a fixed, impenetrable expression. In her mind, the intricate risk chart scrolled rapidly. Last week's contentious labor lawsuit, the presence of an unpredictable journalist tonight, and the crucial new donor she needed to impress. She evaluated situations in terms of intricate graphs and sensational headlines, not in the nuanced context of individual people. If he failed, the entire room would undoubtedly erupt in laughter. Done, she thought decisively. If, by some slim chance, he performed adequately, she could easily manipulate the narrative to portray the night as a discovery of unforeseen talent. What she was utterly unaccustomed to, however, was an employee daring to demand that she uphold her spoken word. Marcus reached the very base of the stage. 2 security guards immediately stepped forward, reflexively blocking his path out of ingrained habit. "Sir, this area is strictly reserved for performers and invited guests only," their tone polite, the boundary they established soft yet undeniably real. Marcus halted, choosing not to argue. He subtly tilted his head, directing their attention to his left. There, a Caucasian couple leaned happily over the stage's edge, actively taking selfies with the majestic Steinway piano prominently displayed in the background. No one attempted to stop them. The guards hesitated for a brief moment, then reluctantly returned to their previous positions directly in front of Marcus. This small, telling interlude starkly exposed the inherent imbalance within the room, the same rule, yet selectively enforced against only one individual. At the periphery of the hall, Gloria Johnson observed the scene, her lips pressing together in a tight line. This was not an isolated incident. A deep, clear male voice cut through the murmuring crowd. "Let him through," David Chin, the music critic, who had been standing nearby, calmly interjected. He did not raise his voice, he merely shifted his shoulders slightly. "Tonight, I desire to hear music, not to witness barricades being repositioned," he stated. The guards exchanged fleeting glances with each other, then grudgingly stepped half aside, opening the path for Marcus, yet still flanking him closely as if they were escorting a potential risk in motion. Victoria's brow furrowed almost imperceptibly. She disliked intensely anyone else dictating the rhythm of her event. A public relations staffer gently touched her sleeve and murmured, "It's better if Chen speaks up, it adds legitimacy." Victoria inhaled deeply, restoring her smile to its meticulously trained setting, the one she had perfected throughout her entire life, adept at transforming any raw emotion into a carefully executed procedure. A female guest audibly muttered, "They should clean the piano as well." Sweat. This was a light, yet subtly bitter, remark, a polite observation carrying a deeply ingrained bias. Marcus meticulously removed his gloves, folding them neatly onto his cleaning tray. It was a small, decisive gesture, akin to shedding an invisible uniform. He then looked directly up at Victoria. "Let's confirm this one final time," he began. "You explicitly stated, if I play better than a professional pianist, you'll marry me. I do not desire that. I simply wish for you to uphold your word, in whatever manner you deem fit, but publicly." A male guest chuckled intelligently. "Customizing the prize, are we?" he quipped. Another added, keep her word. Write a check. Marcus shook his head gently. I do not require a monetary check. I need tangible evidence that words spoken within this space possess substantial weight, Marcus articulated. Davidson nodded approvingly. You are speaking about the crucial concept of public accountability, the critic observed. Yes, Marcus affirmed. In Victoria's eyes, a faint flicker of hesitation appeared, then swiftly vanished. All around the room, numerous phones were simultaneously raised, their tiny indicator lights blinking rhythmically. The internal risk chart within Victoria's mind began to scroll again. Labor hashtags, conservative shareholders. She forced a smile, effectively stamping the discussion shut. We are all witnesses here, she declared. Davidson followed up, and if he performs at a professional standard, I will personally attest to that fact to the press. A few brief bursts of applause erupted. A segment of the room was clearly prepared to value the principle of integrity, not merely the spectacle itself. Marcus nodded once, then stepped onto the elevated riser. One security guard instinctively shifted closer to him. Marcus did not even glance at the guard. His gaze remained fixed solely on the path ahead. For many years, that path had invariably been obstructed by various mechanisms meticulously disguised as courtesy. Tonight, however, he was walking through it under the authority of his own name. Let him through, Davidson reiterated, as if placing a definitive period at the end of a crucial sentence. The guard momentarily froze, then moved to the very edge of the stage below. The selfie-taking couple continued to joke about white keys, black keys. No one felt the need to silence them. The entire room's attention was singularly fixed on one man, and its collective expectations were firmly gathered, anticipating his inevitable fall. Marcus stood directly before the magnificent Steinway & Sons Model D piano. He placed his palm flat on its lid, feeling its cool, solid, and intimately familiar surface. He did not open it immediately. Instead, he looked directly at his challenger, addressing her by name. Miss Whitmore, he stated, I wish to hear you articulate one thing. Clearly. I will keep my word. For the very first time that evening, Victoria missed half a beat in her composure. She was utterly unaccustomed to delivering lines that someone else had authored, but faced with an overwhelming number of cameras and the subtle, insistent nod from her public relations team urging her to decisively control the narrative, she lifted her chin. I will keep my word, she declared. The final syllable was thin and taut as a wire. It was simultaneously a binding promise and an invisible fence. Gloria released a breath that only Marcus seemed to notice. He then lifted the piano's lid. The hinge gave a soft, distinct click. In the front row, a woman whispered conspiratorially to her friend, "What if he genuinely can play?" The friend simply shrugged. "Then we've got ourselves a compelling story," she replied. They still spoke of a story, rather than acknowledging the man himself. Victoria maintained her polite smile, her thumbs subconsciously brushing against the now dry champagne stain on her dress. The persistent fatigue at the base of her neck, the toll of incessant day-long meetings, a deluge of urgent emails, and the constant pressure from demanding shareholders, had been effortlessly channeled into a dare as simple as snapping her fingers. A discordant, unsettling thought briefly crossed her mind. Why had she uttered that particular line so effortlessly? Then, the familiar logic of public relations swiftly enveloped and suppressed the thought once more. If he performs well, we discover new talent. If he performs poorly, the room simply laughs. It's a win-win scenario. Somewhere, the profound concept of dignity still awaited, unspoken, just beyond the closed door of their perception. Marcus smoothly pulled the piano bench out and sat down. He meticulously checked his distance from the keys, allowed his shoulders to drop, and consciously loosened his wrists. These old, ingrained rituals returned to him like deeply embedded muscle memory. He spoke loudly enough for those in the front row to clearly hear him. "Thank you for making way," he said. The statement sounded inherently polite, yet anyone directly addressed by it would unequivocally understand its underlying implication. He was speaking not only to the security guards but also to the pervasive system that had, for so long, relegated him to the hall's periphery. The crowd gradually steadied itself, punctuated by a few impatient jibes. "Get on with it. Don't keep us waiting." At the fringe of the gathering, the man from earlier murmured, "Look, his hands are shaking." His companion replied, "Of course they are. Who wouldn't be nervous?" Davidson offered a small, knowing smile. "Shaking or not, the music itself will provide the answer," he remarked. Marcus gently set his fingertips upon the keys, just touching them, not yet pressing down. The air in the room felt taut and thin, as if collectively awaiting a decisive snap. He had unequivocally refused the monetary offers, compelled Victoria to reiterate, "I will keep my word," in front of numerous witnesses, and deliberately walked through a long-standing barrier under the authority of his own name. All that now remained was the forthcoming sound of the piano. And when that sound finally emerged, it arrived not with a sudden burst of noise, but with a gentle breath that seemed to delicately touch the very air around them. Marcus struck the first key as if gently tapping the surface of calm water. There was no ostentatious showmanship, no elaborate flourishes. Instead, a clean, pure note resonated, immediately followed by a second note that seemed to open a metaphorical door, allowing the evocative melody of "Summertime" to gracefully enter the space. He intentionally chose a tempo half a beat slower than the customary rendition, granting each musical phrase ample room to breathe and fully express itself. His left hand meticulously laid down a soft, supportive foundation, reminiscent of bare feet quietly padding along a warm summer sidewalk. His right hand articulated the melody sparingly, each note descending with precisely the weight it required. The pedal was pressed briefly, then swiftly released, allowing the rich resonance to subtly cling to the marble floor of the hall before gently dissipating like a morning mist. Marcus was not merely narrating a story, he was meticulously constructing musical sentences. The delicate silences interspersed between these notes did not obstruct the listener's ears. Rather, they invited them to lean in closer, to engage more intimately. In the second row, the man who had earlier made a disparaging joke about white keys, black keys, found his smile frozen in midair. Then, it slowly folded in upon itself, extinguished as completely as a candle flame capped under a glass dome. His champagne glass, previously trembling, now remained perfectly still. A woman who had been recording a video abruptly tapped her phone off, then laid it face down, as if she feared making even the slightest sound. The pervasive laughter that had filled the room did not vanish instantaneously. Instead, it gradually diminished, dried up, and receded to the furthest edges of the hall. Davidson leaned forward intently, his expertly trained eye missing no detail. He observed the precise way Marcus anchored a low note to maintain the melodic line's centeredness, and how he intentionally sidestepped ostentatious technical flourishes in favor of a profound, artful restraint. "Beautiful touch, warm tone," David noted mentally. Not a warmth achieved through clever tricks, but through pure, sincere intent. A player who truly comprehends what he is conveying and to whom. David also observed how Marcus subtly bent two blue notes, at precisely the right moments, holding and releasing them in such a way that a familiar melody suddenly felt strangely new again. In the front row, Victoria Whitmore maintained her polite, fixed smile, but a subtle softening registered in her expression. She had meticulously prepared two distinct scenarios to artfully manipulate the narrative. Yet, this particular sound belonged unequivocally to neither. From a slender seam within her memory, she vividly recalled herself at the age of 10, seated at the old upright piano in her childhood home, her elderly teacher gently pressing her hand down and instructing her, "Silence is also a note, young lady." Victoria had intensely disliked that particular lesson. Back then, for her, silence signified only absence. Absence of money, absence of power, absence of applause. But now, the profound silence that Marcus poured into the room carried a distinctly different, heavier weight. The Steinway piano responded to him as if it had intimately known him for many years. During the bridge section of the piece, Marcus subtly tilted the harmony into a deeper shade. Not darkness, but rather a profound depth. He sustained a single note for an extended period, long enough for the listeners to consciously realize they were collectively awaiting its release. And that very moment transformed the room from a crowd merely hungry for spectacle into an attentive, truly listening audience. Servers instinctively slowed their footsteps. Security guards subtly lowered their shoulders, their postures relaxing. The public relations representative, for the first time all evening, ceased checking her internal mental dashboard. Marcus looked at no one in particular. His posture remained calm and centered. His shoulders were relaxed, his back at ease, and his eyes were sometimes half-closed, not as a performance affectation, but because he was deeply attuned to the subtle way the notes resonated off the walls, echoing back to him like gentle waves. He was not presenting himself. He was, in essence, returning to his true self. Each musical phrase he meticulously laid down seemed to rewrite a line on a resume that had long been crossed out. No more being called buddy. No more being referred to as you. No more being dismissed as people like you. Here, in this singular moment, stood Marcus Reed, a man with a distinct name and with an undeniable voice. From her position at the edge of the hall, Gloria Johnson's eyes welled up with unshed tears. When Marcus effortlessly transitioned into a delicate musical ornament, Gloria's thoughts drifted to all the countless mornings she had observed the staff clocking in, each individual carrying a life filled with complexities that no one ever bothered to inquire about. She felt as though this music walked in solidarity alongside them, as if someone had deliberately stepped out from the confines of the service hallway, placed a chair directly in the middle of the opulent red carpet, and extended a heartfelt invitation. Sit. Tell me your story. Somewhere across the expansive room, the pervasive hum of the HVAC system, a background noise that everyone had simply learned to live with, completely faded from conscious awareness. The man with the cigar slowly lowered his hand from his lips. A woman delicately adjusted her shawl and then forgot to complete the gesture, leaving her fingers resting idly in her lap. Someone began to sigh, then abruptly stopped, seemingly afraid to disturb whatever delicate, ethereal drop was poised precariously on the rim of the moment. Victoria glanced down at the patch of champagne on her gown, now dried into a faint, thin ridge. She attempted to direct her thoughts towards concerns of image damage and potential media opportunities, but the thoughts stubbornly refused to form. She suddenly realized she possessed no readily available words to describe this profound experience. She had firmly believed that everything could be neatly labeled and quantified by KPIs, ROI, or sentiment analysis, but this music was, paradoxically, labeling her back. Not as Aries, not as future CO, not as a net worth package. Instead, it was calling forth a true person from behind the invisible glass barrier she had constructed. The sensation was as deeply unsettling as touching a long-forgotten place within herself she hadn't accessed in years. Marcus gracefully circled a short musical variation, then consciously released the urge to overtly display his skill. He paused just before the coda, as if standing at a crucial crossroads. He chose the simpler, more direct path homeward, returning the melody to its original starting point without any unnecessary embellishment. It was a deliberate cultural decision. Summertime, in his capable hands, was not a mere finger exercise. It served as a profound doorway into a deep current of collective memory, lazy porches in the height of summer, worn front steps, and voices that gently softened the sharp edges of a long, arduous day. He did not need to explicitly state black culture. Anyone with discerning ears could clearly perceive its rich current within the music. For a fleeting moment, he looked up and met Gloria's eyes. There was no smile, no overt nod, just a simple, understanding glance that confirmed he knew she was present, and by extension, he knew that all the people like her, those tireless hands that polished floors to a brilliant gleam since dawn, were also metaphorically present in that room. Davidson listened with such intense focus that he noted what was deliberately not played. He silently measured the precise length of the pauses between phrases and observed the effortless way Marcus returned to the tonic key without any delay. This was not an accident. It was a conscious, deliberate choice. He dipped his head slightly, as if silently accepting an invisible handshake. True maturity in musical expression lies not in the act of adding more layers, but rather in the profound art of intentionally omitting more elements. When the final note gracefully descended, Marcus gently lifted the pedal, allowing the sound to completely fade away into total silence. There was no emphatic exclamation point, no grand display of fireworks. Just a small, perfectly round period, followed by an all-encompassing silence. This was not the awkward silence that follows a spilled champagne incident, nor the empty silence of having nothing left to say. This silence had, in a profound way, transformed its very color. It was deep, warm, and powerfully present. The entire room seemed to collectively inhale all at once. A single, solitary clap rang out, then abruptly halted, as if someone had knocked but suddenly remembered that someone else was asleep. Marcus did not turn towards the audience to seek their approval. He remained perfectly still, his hands resting loosely in his lap, his gaze fixed on no one in particular. His posture eloquently conveyed the rest of his message. I am not here to prove anything. I am here to name. To name myself, to name those who are routinely pushed out of the frame, to name the inherent dignity that requires no uniform. In the front row, Victoria felt an unfamiliar voice stir within her, a voice she typically stifled with the relentless demands of her calendar. What have I just done to this man? The question resonated, and it did not stop solely at Marcus. It swept back, encompassing all the countless staff members she routinely passed without truly seeing each day, washing over the impersonal emails that perpetually requested, use the service elevator. Stay out of the photo line. It left a faint, chilling sensation at the nape of her neck. She looked up at the magnificent chandelier, the source of light that had always implicitly sided with her, and for the first time that night, she perceived it as entirely neutral. A young server, tray still clutched in hand, stood utterly frozen, as if spellbound. She swallowed hard, her eyes shining for reasons she couldn't articulate. Beside her, the security guard who had instinctively blocked Marcus earlier allowed his elbows to drop, his posture relaxing. He did not offer an apology, nor did he need to. The profound silence itself was performing that task for him. Marcus then played a small, concluding chord, not to prolong the performance, but rather to gently guide the room back to a state of groundedness after the emotional journey it had just undertaken. He then lifted his hands from the keys and lowered the lid one notch, without fully closing it. He turned his head slightly to locate David Chen. They did not exchange words. A single, mutual nod contained the entire unspoken sentence, I'm still here. Any remaining laughter, if it still existed, was now relegated to the distant margins of the room. At the very heart of the room resided a new, profound quiet, a quiet that had been both meticulously sculpted by the music and left behind like fertile soil, ready for the next thing to grow. In that transformed space, jokes about white and black keys held no relevance, because people had just experienced something that transcended the mere color of the keys. Marcus inhaled deeply, then slowly exhaled. He did not stand up. He allowed the room to gradually reset its collective heartbeat. And in the front row, Victoria, the hostess who had so casually tossed a marriage dare like a stone into a tranquil pond, now felt every single ripple of that action returning to the very shore where she stood. She finally understood. From this moment forward, every single word she uttered would invariably have to pass through this profound silence. The first musical piece had concluded. The room had undergone a fundamental change in its atmosphere, and the control, which Victoria had always believed was solely hers, was now subtly and quietly shifting towards the piano. The transformed silence had not yet fully dissipated when Marcus subtly tilted his head, as if attentively listening to the room's lingering resonance one last time. He remained seated. He simply rolled his wrists, adjusted his distance from the keys once more, and then changed his musical language. Transitioning from the soothing lull of summer, he moved to the precise, clean architecture of the classics. A sonata, embodying the very skeleton of discipline, came vibrantly to life. The opening theme was crisp, clear, performed with an allegro motorio tempo. Marcus's left hand constructed a formidable rhythmic wall with evenly rolled chords, mechanical in their precision, yet never overwhelming the melody. His right hand gracefully sketched a thin, lyrical cantilena line, delicate in its execution yet powerfully sinewy in its structure. He utilized the pedal sparingly, releasing it precisely at the designated cut points, so that each musical movement clearly revealed its inherent structure instead of being obscured in a hazy fog of emotion. During the transition section, he meticulously orchestrated a complex dialogue between his two hands, a 3:2 cross rhythm that meshed together like perfectly synchronized gears. Every single accent landed with just enough emphasis to seamlessly support the subsequent phrase, never forcing its presence. The room, so accustomed to being merely served sensational experiences, found itself unconsciously counting along with him. The man, who had been holding a cigar, slowly lowered it from his lips, placing it carefully into an ashtray, as if he feared that even a wisp of smoke might smudge the pristine musical lines. An older woman tilted her head, narrowing her eyes slightly, a reflexive gesture of someone who had once studied piano, meticulously checking the voicing of the chords. In the back row, a young man slowly lowered his phone, entirely forgetting about vertical recording mode. Perhaps the brief video clip no longer seemed sufficient. David Shin shifted half a foot closer, leaning in to capture more of the rich mid-range frequencies. He meticulously noted the rare degree of control Marcus displayed, smooth legato passages performed with his fourth and fifth fingers, trills executed cleanly without any stray notes, and the powerful crescendo from pianissimo to fortissimo achieved without even a hint of a strained gasp. In the development section, Marcus skillfully fragmented the theme, rotating and reassembling its components. The arc of dynamics rose, guided by intellect, not by raw adrenaline. David exhaled softly, almost imperceptibly, to himself. Virtuoso, he thought. The word descended in two distinct beats, cautious, then decisively certain. Marcus was not attempting to captivate hearts with raw emotion. He was meticulously constructing a bridge of musical logic. Those who had initially come for mere entertainment understood halfway across this bridge that they were now standing in the presence of genuine art. The faint shuffling sounds of chairs gradually subsided. The security guard, who had initially stepped forward to block Marcus's path, now subtly lowered his shoulders. For the very first time that evening, his eyes were not vigilant or watchful, but rather attentively following the music. Victoria Whitmore sat rigidly upright, the smile on her face resembling an antiquated, worn-out mask. With each successive phrase, she felt the invisible dashboard within her mind, her KPIs, headlines, and sentiment analyses flicker erratically for a few seconds before stubbornly reasserting itself. She glanced towards her public relations manager. "That's sufficient, isn't it?" she inquired. The other individual's eyes wavered. "If we interrupt at this peak moment, we will be absolutely crucified," the PR manager whispered. Victoria bristled at being in a situation over which she lacked complete control. She desperately wanted to impose a definitive period, to bring the evening back within the confines of the outline she had meticulously planned. In the coda, Marcus allowed the arpeggios to pass by like a gentle draft of wind, breaking elegantly on the dynamic stair just before a fortissimo, then resolutely refusing to step into it. He returned to the piano, concluding the phrase with a cadence as clean and distinct as a carefully drawn boundary line. This demonstrated the true power of control, the profound ability to discern where one could be loud and yet consciously choose not to be. Another silence followed, but this time, spontaneous and robust applause erupted immediately afterward, sharp and full. This was not the polite, reserved clapping typically heard at a gala. This was raw, unadulterated recognition. A few people half rose from their seats. Then, an entire row stood up in unison. Prejudice had not vanished entirely, it had simply retreated into the background, subtly glancing around for potential allies. David Shin lowered his chin by precisely a centimeter, a subtle, professional gesture. He then angled himself slightly towards the waiting cameras. "Professional standard," he declared. There were no waving hands, no exaggerated pronouncements. A line of invisible text had just been irrevocably signed and sealed. A few reporters exchanged knowing looks. They had secured their crucial pull quote. Victoria felt control slipping away from her like fine sand sifting through her fingers. She stood frozen in the natural pause that followed, then clipped the microphone to her lapel. "Thank you," she began, her voice smooth as polished glass. "A truly impressive performance. Now let's—" Her words were abruptly drowned out by a lone shout. "More. Another encore." The crowd, which she had meticulously directed and controlled from the very beginning of the night, was now unequivocally choosing its own path. The public relations manager swiveled towards her. "Let him perform one more, Victoria." She clenched her jaw, her thumb unconsciously rubbing the now-dried champagne stain on her dress. "Back to work," Victoria murmured quietly, her voice devoid of its public smoothness, aimed solely at Marcus, her final, desperate attempt to snap his resolve. Marcus looked directly at her for a beat. His gaze was neither defiant nor submissive, it was simply a steady, unwavering look. The gaze was not intensely heated, but it possessed an undeniable edge. "You just explicitly stated that you would keep your word," he reminded her. In the front row, a few guests turned to each other, whispering. They had heard her implication clearly enough, even without the amplification of the microphone. Her face had conveyed it all. An older woman, who had remained silent until this moment, spoke up with a clear, authoritative voice. "We would very much like to hear more," she declared. A heavy-set man, who had eagerly wagered earlier, nodded rapidly in agreement. "Yes, more," he echoed. The young man in the back of the room reactivated his phone's camera, but this time, his intention was to record the music, not to capture a misstep. The security guard glanced at his superior. The superior simply shrugged, then moved to the edge of the stage. The room's center of gravity had decisively shifted away from the hostess and towards the man seated at the piano. Victoria slowly set the microphone down, her smile returning but now thinner, almost transparent. Internally, she heard a faint, unsettling crack. The meticulously crafted image, the protective shell she had inhabited throughout her life, was fracturing at its very seams. She worried incessantly about her shareholders, about the headlines that would dominate tomorrow's news, and about her upcoming dinner with the crucial donor. Yet, at the same time, an uninvited question forcefully entered her mind. Why do I truly desire to cut this performance short? Is it due to the strict schedule? Or is it because I simply cannot tolerate the fact that someone who supposedly doesn't belong here has just fundamentally redefined the entire atmosphere of this room? Marcus subtly swiveled his bench. Remaining on the stage, he surveyed the rows of guests calling for more, not to collect their approving glances, but to gauge the collective breath of the room. His gaze found David Chin. Their eyes met amidst the murmurs. David offered a small nod, another invisible signature of agreement. Marcus placed his hands on the keys, but before commencing to play, he spoke just loudly enough for the front row to hear. "Thank you," he said. "I won't make you noisier. I'll simply let the music perform its designated part." He inclined his head gracefully towards Victoria, a polite gesture utterly devoid of submission. "I respect you," he stated, "and I remember your word." He mentally queued up the third piece, one that he knew would demand both the pinnacle of his technical skill and his physical stamina, but he did not rush into it. Silence had just learned its profound job. He allowed it to work its magic for one more beat. Phones were lifted again, but their angles had changed. Now, people were aiming to capture his triumphant entrance, not his anticipated downfall. At the very edge of the hall, Gloria Johnson gently placed a hand over her heart, a nascent smile just beginning to form on her lips. She observed the other servers standing a little straighter, as if the very spine of the entire evening shift had been realigned. The security guard, who had frequently blocked Marcus's path, stepped back another half-pace, not out of fear, but as if to avoid blurring the powerful outline that was taking shape before him. Victoria slowly sat down. The public relations manager whispered the revised schedule to her. "We'll designate this a special set. After this next musical piece, you will step in to express your gratitude to him and then announce the auction." Victoria nodded, her eyes never leaving Marcus's hands. She was uncertain whether she secretly hoped he would stumble, thereby allowing her to reclaim her lost control, or if she wished for him to soar to new heights, freeing her from the burdensome need to maintain control any longer. Marcus lowered his wrists. The opening theme of the next piece had not yet sounded, but the entire room was already leaning expectantly towards the piano. Somewhere, the initial feeling of sport or entertainment had entirely slipped from their grasp. What remained was pure art, and the people standing before it, no longer concealing themselves behind their assigned roles. He closed his eyes for a mere half-second, just long enough to hear the internal clock within him click perfectly into place. Then he opened them and struck the first note. The room, like a majestic sail catching the perfect wind, visibly swelled, and the night decisively shifted into an entirely new orbit. The very first note landed with resounding impact, and the entire room collectively leaned towards the piano. Marcus effectively locked the door behind any lingering doubt. There were to be no more gentle lullabies, no more distinct architectural disciplines. He deliberately chose an extremely technical piece, one filled with steep double-note passages, lengthy octave leaps, razor-close hand crossings, and constantly shifting polyrhythms ranging from 3 to 4 to 6, trading roles without a single pause. This was not a piece designed to simply sound pleasant. It was a formidable summit that demanded both immense physical muscle and unwavering mental nerve. His left hand drove a relentless ostinato, as smooth and precise as a belt drive. His right hand strung staccato beads of notes, as exact as a sewing machine. In the second section, he ingeniously bent the theme into a left-hand trill, a notoriously difficult and rarely chosen move, while his right hand navigated the high register with the precarious balance of a tightrope walker. The pedal was used only sporadically, dotted strategically at phrase openings, and lifted precisely before any blurring or clouding of sound could occur. Even on rapid, repeated note runs, he employed a subtle wrist rotary motion instead of engaging his entire arm, maintaining incredible speed without ever compromising the clarity of the sound. Everything was executed with profound control. No strain was visible whatsoever. The audience collectively held its breath in the face of such visibly challenging execution. The man who had once flippantly joked about white keys, black keys, slowly drew his hand away from his glass. The security guard, who had previously blocked Marcus's path, was now unconsciously leaning forward, engrossed. Gloria Johnson gripped the edge of a table, the steady pulse in her wrist clearly discernible with each beat. The public relations woman looked up from her screen, abandoning an unsent text message. Laughter had long ago evaporated from the room. What remained was an almost palpable, singular attention. Victoria Whitmore attempted to quickly erect her mental fence once more. This was her event. This was her story to tell. If necessary, she could simply cut the performance short. But the music obeyed no such fence. It forged its own path through the glittering chandeliers, through the multitude of cameras, and directly past her meticulously crafted KPI formulas. In the coda, Marcus pushed a tremolo octave to the very precipice of fortissimo, then, astonishingly, did not break through. He reined it in, artfully detoured into a short glissando, returning the phrase to piano with the grace of a perfectly executed stop command. The transition was so exquisitely smooth that the entire hall felt as if it had subtly slid half a step further into a new reality. Silence. One beat, two beats, then an explosive eruption. A thick, unified standing ovation burst forth. The front row stood, then the back. Chairs clattered loudly, glasses chimed, but no one cared. Phones rose like an eager forest, no longer hunting for a misstep, but desperately clinging to a profound moment. At the edge of the stage, David Chin applauded half a beat slower than the rest, as if to measure its exact precision, then spoke just loudly enough to be captured by someone's recording microphone, at a very high professional level. Marcus remained seated, his hands loose in his lap. He did not bow yet. He returned the room to itself. The commotion belonged entirely to them. Victoria took the microphone. "Thank you," she began, but the clapping did not subside. One group of guests shouted, "Encore!" Another called out, "Marcus?" She tried again, her voice smooth and practiced. This time, The applause surged like an overwhelming wave. It was not hostile, but it was definitively not hers to command in that moment. The public relations manager whispered at her shoulder, "Don't cut it now." Her phone buzzed constantly, internal messages, social media tags, an urgent email from legal counsel stating, "Avoid binding statements. Marriage is a personal legal matter." From mid-hall, a man's voice rang out clearly, "You said you'd marry him if he played better than a pro." Another voice followed, "Keep your word." Several cameras pivoted sharply, focusing on her face. The bright stage lights starkly illuminated the rise and fall of her collarbones with each strained breath she took. She vividly recalled the exact phrase, "I will keep my word," that Marcus had compelled her to repeat earlier. Those words now felt like a firm lock, a clasp tightening around her wrist. Not a legal shackle, but an inescapable moral one. In her head, two competing dashboards violently crashed into each other. On one side, her reputation, the shareholders, the donors, the lawyers, and intricate marital clauses. On the other side, a room full of eager witnesses, a respected critic's unequivocal declaration of professional level, and a video already rapidly going viral. She knew legally that the joke carried no binding weight. Marriage could not be coerced. She could easily dismiss her statement as mere hyperbole. However, in the unforgiving court of public ethics, she was cornered, with no refuge. The story was rapidly becoming theirs, a tale of promises made and then potentially reneged upon, and she found herself trapped in a personal decision that felt both irrational and dangerous. Marcus rose just as the clapping dipped slightly. He did not walk towards the microphone. He bowed subtly, just enough to honor the standing room, then looked directly at Victoria. There was no accusation, no pressure, just a clear reminder in his gaze, "The words are on your side." David Shin stepped halfway out of his row, speaking at a volume perfectly calibrated for clips. "From a professional standpoint," he declared, "he just performed at a level I would gladly put my name to in print. No more, no less." It was precisely the kind of endorsement that tightened the moral lock around Victoria. A few donor faces turned to each other, acknowledging the significant weight of Chen's words. The public relations manager nudged the microphone towards Victoria. "We can talk about keeping one's word and supporting talent. Flip the narrative," she urged. Victoria's phone lit up again. An investor messaged, asking, "What's going on?" A journalist requested a statement. Corporate counsel texted, "Do not confirm intent to marry." Victoria flashed back to her teenage years, the first time she was told, "Don't let anyone steer you. Keep your hands on the wheel." Now, the music itself was steering. "We'll pause here," she attempted to declare, but another corner of the room immediately retorted, "No more." The crowd was not rude, they were united. And that unity, expressed through their sustained applause and the critic's authoritative endorsement, demanded that she confront her own words. Marcus raised his hand, signaling for quiet for one more moment. He then said, "Just enough. I don't need a wedding. I need people to keep their word." The statement reframed the entire debate, shifting it away from marital law and squarely back into the ethics of speech. This was something everyone could easily understand, and everyone felt empowered to judge. An older woman, her voice clear and imbued with authority, called out, "You can fulfill your promise in another way, but you absolutely must keep it." Several heads nodded in agreement. A potential solution, a way out, had just presented itself. No forced marriage, but no broken promise either. Victoria swallowed hard, her throat tight. She was not inherently cruel. She had been rigorously trained to win. And winning, in her established lexicon, invariably meant never relinquishing control. In this precise moment, she was compelled to learn a new definition of right. Not merely the correct strategic move, but the morally righteous thing to do. A second standing ovation rose spontaneously. This one was specifically for the night's profound redefinition. Even the security guard clapped, slightly offbeat, but his applause was undeniably genuine. Gloria discreetly dabbed the corner of her eye with the edge of a napkin. David Shin pocketed his phone, as if formally submitting his testimony. At the very edge of the hall, an elderly lady squinted, then murmured, "I know him." Her neighbor leaned in closer. "I believe he used to be at the conservatory." Marcus Reed. The name, freed from the dismissive labels of buddy or you, dropped into the room like a latch definitively clicking shut. A few people silently mouthed it back to themselves, savoring the taste of a reclaimed identity. "He performed at the City Theater when he was 22, the older woman stated firmly. "That encore, I remember it perfectly." A silver-haired man in gold-rimmed glasses nodded in confirmation. The music press enthusiastically hailed him as a new talent. A younger guest quickly pulled out his phone and typed rapidly. The screen illuminated with an old photograph. A young man in a black suit bowing gracefully before a piano. Davidson narrowed his eyes, diligently sifting through his extensive professional memory. "I read that review," he mused. "And I recall a master class. My teacher mentioned your name." He turned towards Marcus, nodding slightly, as if affirming a thread that had, in fact, never truly broken. Victoria Whitmore's breath momentarily hitched. She looked towards her public relations manager for information. The PR manager checked her phone, whispering, "Old photos are surfacing." The hashtag Marcus Reed just exploded. Victoria's own phone buzzed insistently. An email from legal counsel, "No public statements regarding marriage." A text from an investor, "What's going on?" But the one line she found she could not possibly sidestep was the name Marcus Reed. It rolled steadily in her mind, forcefully pushing aside abstract terms like KPI, sentiment, and ROI. The space around Marcus visibly expanded. He stood straight, dipping his head slightly, as if subtly apologizing for being recognized. Gloria Johnson took half a step from the edge, her hand gripping the corner of a napkin. She hesitated briefly. This was not something to parade before a crowd, but she had just witnessed him being reduced to a punchline. She raised her voice enough for it to carry across the hall. "If we're speaking about Marcus, allow me to recount the rest of his story," she declared. The room instinctively quieted, deferring to a voice that carried the weight of years. "Marcus's mother was gravely ill for a very long time," Gloria stated plainly, without a hint of tears. "They sustained themselves on 2 shifts, hers and his. When her condition tragically worsened, the overwhelming medical bills descended upon them like a sudden, relentless storm. His very first piano, the one he had painstakingly saved for through a combination of scholarships and various side jobs, was sold to cover the exorbitant hospital costs." A woman brought her hand to her mouth in a gesture of shock. A man slowly, deliberately set his glass down on the table. Gloria looked at Marcus, as if silently seeking his permission to continue. He nodded almost imperceptibly, his eyes closing for a brief moment. She continued, "He withdrew from the conservatory and took on night cleaning jobs to cover the rent, repay their mounting debts, and simply survive. And music," Gloria searched for the precise words, "music became inextricably linked to the scent of antiseptic, to the stark white sheets of a hospital bed, to the monotonous sound of medical monitors. He had locked it away deep within himself." Davidson added another piece to the narrative, professional yet warm. Talent does not simply vanish. It buries itself when it is deprived of nourishment. He surveyed the room, carefully placing the phrase so that non-musicians could readily comprehend its profound meaning. Gloria lowered her gaze, then lifted it again, her face firming with resolve. "And this is not merely a narrative about poverty," she stated, clipping her words with quiet intensity. "Someone once told him, following an audition, we require an individual who fits the hall. Your hair ought to be tidier. Do not play with such an abundance of color. Your demeanor must be more professional." She did not exaggerate. Those words were polite, yet dangerously insidious precisely for that reason. Another time, a security guard unjustly blocked him at a stage door, forcing him to utilize the service stairs, even though he possessed a valid invitation in hand. A small, suppressed gasp escaped from the third row, then quickly subsided. Some guests exchanged uneasy glances. Their own casually uttered words to their staff members suddenly materialized before them, spelled out in stark, uncomfortable clarity. The barrier present here was not constructed of brick. It was deeply ingrained etiquette, subtly wired into the very fabric of the mind. Marcus heard his name repeated throughout the room, Marcus, not Buddy. Each repetition felt like a small hammer gently tapping away old, hardened paint. He drew in a deep breath, held it, then slowly exhaled. He did not wish for tonight to transform into his private tragedy, publicly displayed. But Gloria was not merely recounting a sorrowful tale. She was explicitly naming the systemic problem, the meticulously polished system that had systematically pushed him to the margins. Victoria's mind flashed back to the internal checklist she had circulated. Staff, stay out of the frame. Use the service elevator. Do not stand in the lobby during guest check-in. She desperately wanted to defend herself. That's standard procedure, she thought, not discrimination. But behind that thought came another, quieter one. Who actually writes these procedures? She looked at Marcus and, unbidden, perceived how the profound simplicity in his posture starkly contrasted with the intricate complexity of the metaphorical glass casing that surrounded her own life. Davidson offered a small nod to Gloria, a silent acknowledgement and thanks for articulating the truth so plainly. He then added Marcus's professional credential. At the conservatory, he consistently topped the piano class for 2 consecutive semesters, Chin stated. I possess an old note from a professor mentioning his deep touch, wide ear, and pedal control, which were exceptionally rare for his age. Chen deliberately did not mention the times Marcus had lost funding because he did not conform to the face of the program. The phrase was too sharp and critical to introduce at that moment, but the attentive guests had already made the connection when Gloria had stated, "Fit the hall." A middle-aged man frowned. That still occurs today? He wondered aloud. Another person beside him interjected, "It never ceased, it merely adopted a different language." A palpable sense of shame, a rare emotion at such a lavish gala, was now undeniably present. It was not loud or overt, but it was heavy and pervasive. Victoria lifted the microphone, then slowly set it back down. She instinctively knew that anything she uttered now would be meticulously filtered through the heightened moral lens that had just been raised. She glanced at her public relations manager. The PR manager subtly shook her head. "Don't defend," she whispered. "Listen." It was advice utterly unfamiliar to someone whose entire existence revolved around steering and controlling narratives. But tonight, silence, once again, occupied precisely the right place. Gloria concluded her statement, her voice unwavering and steady. "He does not require anyone's pity," she asserted. "He merely needs to be addressed by his given name and not be barred from doors that should inherently already be open to him." She turned directly to Marcus, offering a warm smile. "Tonight, Marcus, you opened one such door yourself, through the sheer power of your music." Marcus nodded, his eyes visibly damp with emotion, yet unwavering in their resolve. He surveyed the room, looking at the people who had earlier laughed at him, now sitting rigidly upright, at the security guard who had once blocked his path, now subtly bowing his head, and at Victoria, her face momentarily blank, in a rare second of seeing her true reflection. "I did not abandon music because I ceased loving it," Marcus stated, speaking about himself for the very first time that evening. His voice was low, yet remarkably clear. "I left because every single note I played transported me back to the stark reality of the hospital room. I simply needed to do something straightforward, to pay the rent, to settle debts, to survive." He paused briefly. "Tonight," he continued, "I remembered precisely why I learned to play. Not to garner applause, but simply to exist as a person." This statement clicked a second, crucial lock within the room. Recognition was no longer merely about his extraordinary skill. It transcended into a collective agreement that before them stood a complete, whole human being. At the edge of the hall, the woman who had initially recognized him softly remarked, "We have lost you for far too long." Davidson responded as if formally entering it into an official record. "From this moment forward, write it correctly, Marcus Reed." Marcus nodded, a faint smile gracing his lips. Victoria Whitmore stood in the midst of powerful waves of emotion moving distinctly against her. She knew implicitly that the game had fundamentally changed. There would be no more abrupt cuts at the behest of her public relations team. No more rewriting the narrative with a few neat, manipulative lines. Before her stood a man who had profoundly reset the very measure of dignity, and behind her, within the incessantly buzzing phone, was a world demanding that she uphold her word in its truest, most authentic sense. The night from this point would not revert to its previous structure, and the subsequent act, a media storm, intense public pressure, and closed-door conversations, was already poised, waiting just beyond the door that had been called open. The profound silence, evoked by the insistence of, say his name, had barely dissipated when the entire hall erupted in a tempest of simultaneous phone alerts. Screens illuminated in scattered blue dots, and push notifications incessantly pinged without a moment's pause. A young man shouted excitedly, "It's viral on TikTok." Another quickly added, "X is flooded with clips." On several phones, the same shocking headline repeatedly flashed, "Aries mocks black janitor. Then he plays like a genius." Beneath it, hashtags swelled exponentially by the second. Hashtag Marcus Reed, hashtag Keep Your Word, hashtag Whitmore Grand. One rapidly circulating viral edit juxtaposed Victoria's audacious marriage dare directly against Marcus's sublime performances of Summertime and The Sonata. A fast-moving news account slapped a small chirrun across the bottom of its screen, "Publicly promised marriage." At the hotel's entrance, security personnel reported the presence of numerous news vans outside, with reporters clamoring for entry. The hotel's public relations department fielded calls stacked endlessly upon other calls. Legal counsel messaged urgently, "Absolutely no confirmation of any marriage. All statements must remain strictly neutral." Two sharp blades of social media instantly emerged. On one side, comments demanding justice piled up. "Respect dignity. Keep your word. Incredible Marcus." On the other, a shadowier side swelled with cruel mockery, delving into his personal life. Doctored images brazenly transformed his tragedy into a public circus. Even the thunderous applause was clipped and repurposed into meme format. Victoria felt her control slipping away from her like coat buttons popping loose, one by one. The metrics dashboard in her head, sentiment, reach, risk, flashed a chaotic red and green, reminiscent of a frenetic trading floor. An investor texted bluntly, "Do not allow private matters to escalate into a corporate commitment." Legal counsel unequivocally wrote, "Marriage is a personal matter. It cannot be publicly binding." The public relations manager leaned close to whisper, "One wrong word, and we will spend an entire week doing damage control." In front of the piano, Marcus stood perfectly still. He observed the crowd spiraling into a chaotic vortex of clips and fragmented attention. This was not what he had worked tonight to achieve, he thought. He looked up, his voice calm, yet clear enough to carry above the din. "We are transforming tonight into a circus," he stated. A few heads abruptly jerked up. He then turned to Victoria. "I suggest we speak in private," he proposed, not to conceal anything, but to transition from this mockery to genuinely making things right. A ripple of dissent spread through the crowd. "No, say it here," someone shouted. "Keep your word in front of everyone." David Chin raised his hand for quiet. "If you truly desire the correct answer," he interjected, "both parties need to engage in a conversation with each other, like adults." He was not shielding anyone. He was, in essence, safeguarding the fundamental quality of the ultimate decision. Gloria Johnson added a half-sentence, subtly leaning towards appealing to their collective conscience. "Let them communicate." Victoria met Marcus's steady gaze. There was no pleading in his eyes, no overt threat, simply an earnest invitation. A tense string deep within her seemed to slacken. She offered the smallest, almost imperceptible nod. Her public relations team immediately mapped out the logistical details. Manager's office, second floor. Security personnel quickly formed a path through the dense sea of people and cameras, creating a clear corridor out of politely positioned elbows and hushed murmurs. A few shouts of protest followed them, but David Chin smoothly intervened with a soft, yet firm, block. "You will receive your answer," he assured the crowd. Grant them 5 minutes. The front row, sensing the shift, became quiet and stepped back half a pace. The swirling cyclone of public attention then swung away from Marcus's heels and firmly fixed itself upon Victoria's retreating back. The office door closed with a decisive thud, the pervasive noise outside dropping perceptibly, as if a volume knob had been slowly turned down. Victoria leaned against the table, her thumb compulsively rubbing the faded champagne stain on her dress, a habit she resorted to when tense. Her phone glowed relentlessly with a barrage of incoming calls and texts, her legal team, her public relations group, 2 major shareholders, and a persistent reporter. Marcus did not sit down. He stood a measured distance from the desk, his hands loosely clasped in front of him. "I am not here to compel you into a wedding," Marcus began plainly. "I want you to honor your word in the correct manner, to me as an individual, and to the inherent culture of this place." Victoria looked up at him. "Keep your word," she repeated, her tone smooth but noticeably dry. Years of experience had ingrained in her the belief that everything had to be converted into quantifiable units before it could be effectively managed. Marcus nodded. "It can be quantified," he affirmed. 1. A public apology. Use my name. Acknowledge the specific act and its impact. None of that, if anyone was offended, defensive language. He continued, enumerating his demands on his fingers. 2. Concrete commitments. He ticked them off. The Reed Family Scholarship Fund for underprivileged music students, quarterly free community concerts, and bias awareness training for management, commencing with yourself. He paused, his eyes unwavering. 3. Procedural change. Eliminate the keep staff out of frame rule. Call employees by their names. Stop blocking service elevators without legitimate cause. Establish listening sessions with frontline staff and an anonymous feedback channel. Victoria heard the terms training, listening, and drop procedures, and felt a flicker of irritation. To her, these were simply synonyms for losing control. She consciously suppressed this reflex and asked, "And what is your role in this?" Marcus replied, "I will not accept any money. I will seize this opportunity to return to music, to play for the public, especially in areas where live music is a rare occurrence. I will also advise you on how to cultivate a culture of respect. Not merely on stage, but within the hallways, in emails, and in meeting agendas." Within Victoria's mind, 2 conflicting voices fiercely wrestled. The old, familiar voice urged, "This is a crisis. Shut it down. Forget about it entirely." The new voice, quieter but undeniably correct, countered, "This is your singular opportunity to accomplish something truly meaningful." She looked directly at Marcus, suddenly realizing that what unsettled her most was not his specific demands, but rather his precise, unwavering calm. There was no begging, no bargaining in his demeanor. He was simply setting the standard. Her phone buzzed again. Legal counsel's message read, "Only express respect for talent, commitment to inclusion. Avoid keep your word, too risky." The public relations team advised, "If we pivot to Scholarship Plus programs, a positive spin is possible." An investor's message stated, "Avoid setting a precedent." These messages, like arrows, all pointed towards a seemingly safe path. Speak smoothly, accomplish little. But that perceived safe path was now dangerously untenable. The crowd had already distinctly heard her say, "Keep your word." Evading that commitment now would only serve to inflame the situation further. "If I proceed with this," Victoria inquired slowly, "will it be perceived as an admission of a systemic fault?" Marcus replied, "Victoria, if the system indeed possesses a fault, acknowledging it is the sole starting point for its rectification." She hesitated for a brief beat at the profound simplicity of his statement. She had been rigorously taught since childhood to always win, never to admit fault. But tonight, winning meant doing the morally correct thing. "Regarding that line," Marcus continued, "where I said, 'I'll marry you, Victoria,' no one possesses the right to compel marriage. You can fulfill your word in its human sense. Utilize your power to elevate, not to suppress." His words settled into the room with a fitting weight, not ornate, but clear and precise. They paused. The distant noise from outside the hall resembled the gentle surf heard through a pane of glass. Victoria, for the very first time, consciously released the champagne stain she had been unconsciously rubbing beneath her thumb. "I require one thing," she stated. "I do not wish to become a mere character in someone else's viral clip. If I agree to this, I will utter it in my own words." Marcus responded, "All I require is for it to be done. The words are yours. The work, however, is ours." The office door subtly cracked open. The public relations manager poked her head in. "They're waiting," she announced. "TV crews are already inside." David Shin stood just outside the threshold, not crossing it, asking only, "Are you two all right?" Marcus looked at Victoria. She took a long, deliberate breath, not for outward show, but to make a profound choice. "I will issue an apology, formally announce the establishment of the scholarship fund, the community concert program, comprehensive management training, and the implementation of procedural changes," she stated crisply, as if meticulously itemizing an investment portfolio. Only this time, the investment was in people. She looked up at Marcus. "You will accompany me," she instructed, "but when I speak solely myself." Marcus affirmed, "I will stand there to confirm what is stated, with my name, whenever it becomes necessary." Victoria swiftly tapped out a message on her phone. "Prepare statement, no mention of marriage. Emphasize keeping word through action." Legal counsel immediately sent back a response. "Address unconditional apology plus specific commitments." She read the message, then deliberately deleted the hedging phrase, "if anyone was offended," replacing it with the direct and unequivocal, "I was wrong." It was a small, yet personally painful, alteration. Before opening the door, Victoria paused, posing a question that was part business strategy and part a search for truth. "If I make a mistake, what will you do?" she asked. Marcus replied, "I will remind you of your word in front of everyone." She nodded, a silent acknowledgement of accepting a binding obligation she had diligently avoided throughout her entire career. The door swung open wide. Noise, flashing cameras, and bright lights flooded into the room like a sudden tide. The social media storm outside was still raging, sharp and cold. But at its very center, there was a small, newly defined space, a shift from mockery to genuine rectification. And that profound shift would be the ultimate measure of what was to come next, whether she would truly uphold her word through action before a city that was now intently watching. The doors swung open, and the lights and cameras rushed in like an overwhelming tide. But instead of retreating, Victoria stopped squarely at the microphone. Marcus positioned himself just to her right, close enough to share the intensity of the moment, yet far enough not to overshadow her. David Shin stood in the front row, like an official seal of authenticity, and Gloria Johnson remained at the edge of the hall, still clutching the corner of her napkin. Victoria surveyed the room, took a deep breath, and this time, she did not read from the meticulously prepared, safe draft. "Tonight I was wrong," she began. "I disrespected Marcus Reed, I failed to address him by his name, and I effectively transformed my own employee into an invisible shadow. I offer my sincere apologies to him, and to everyone we have ever treated as invisible." The simple declaration, "I was wrong," landed cleanly in the room, utterly devoid of any cushioning phrases like, "if anyone was offended." Her public relations team held its collective breath. Legal counsel frantically fired off messages, but it was already too late, in a profoundly positive way. She continued, her voice steady and resolute. "Regarding the statement, 'I'll marry you,' marriage is not something to be wagered. I will uphold my word in the proper manner, through concrete action." Beginning tonight, Victoria announced, "I am formally inaugurating a comprehensive program of rebuilding and reform." The room leaned forward expectantly towards the microphone. Some cameras pivoted to capture Marcus's reaction. He neither nodded nor shook his head, he allowed her words to run their full course. "First," Victoria declared, "we are establishing the Reed Family Scholarship for talented music students who lack financial resources, with priority given to underrepresented communities. The fund will be overseen by an independent board, the Whitmore Group will serve solely as the sponsor. She paused for a brief half-beat. I aspire for that name to endure long after this evening, she added. A single, distinct clap broke out from the audience. It was not a polite, perfunctory applause, but rather the visceral reflex of witnessing a significant new door being constructed. Second, she continued, raising her head, we will launch the Keys for Dignity Community Concert Series in Harlem and Brooklyn. Admission will be free, and musicians and crew will receive full union wages. Marcus Reed will open the inaugural show, and we commit to bringing music to places that rarely have the opportunity to experience it. Marcus turned to her and quietly stated, that is the part one agree to. Cameras subtly captured his quiet affirmation, anchoring it to the official record. Third, Victoria continued, mandatory anti-bias and DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, training will be implemented for all management personnel, commencing with myself. We will engage an independent firm, conduct anonymous pre- and post-surveys, and publicly release the results. A skeptical sounded somewhere in the crowd, suggesting PR stunt, but David Chen subtly tilted his head, as if mentally marking it, measurable means accountable. Fourth, her tone noticeably hardened, I am scrapping the staff must not appear in frame rule where it is not required, and I am removing service elevator blockages in non-security areas. Starting tomorrow, all managers will address staff by their proper names. She scanned the room intently. Anyone who fails to comply with this will not remain employed here. A wave of murmurs rippled through the staff positioned at the edges of the hall. A few instinctively adjusted their name badges, as if to make them more visible. Fifth, Victoria paused, then stated plainly, we are raising our minimum wage to a true living wage in accordance with city standards, and adding health stipends for night shifts. The deadline for implementation is next quarter. An involuntary gasp escaped the crowd. This was no longer merely a public relations exercise. This was a tangible budget commitment. Sixth, she slowed her pace. Every month, I will personally host a listening session with frontline staff, complemented by an anonymous feedback channel directed straight to the executive board. There will be no polished reports, only the unvarnished truth. Victoria lowered the microphone slightly, then raised it again. And finally, she concluded, I am inviting Marcus Reed to serve as my independent human values advisor for 1 year. Consider it humility coaching. He will possess the inherent right to articulate what I may not wish to hear, and I will bear the responsibility of truly listening. A faint smile passed over Marcus's face, not in triumph, but because the right thing had finally been explicitly named. Camera shutters snapped furiously. A reporter called out, do you admit you discriminated? Victoria inhaled deeply. I admit that bias exists within my organization, and indeed within myself, she responded. I assume full responsibility for rectifying it. This statement was not legally perfect, but it was ethically sound. Faces that had smirked earlier now remained silent. Marcus requested the microphone for only a few seconds. Thank you, he said. I do not require a wedding. I require what has been promised to be genuinely fulfilled. I accept the advisor role, not to issue grades, but to inquire, how do we genuinely treat people when the cameras are no longer present? He handed the microphone back, his gesture clean and resolute. Gloria tilted her head, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, but her cheeks remained dry. She leaned towards Victoria as Victoria stepped down from the platform. Thank you for acknowledging you were wrong, Gloria said. From tomorrow, please call me Gloria. Victoria hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Yes, Miss Gloria, she replied. The hierarchy had seemingly flipped, but it had, in fact, settled into its correct and rightful place. In the front row, David Chen spoke just loudly enough for the microphones to capture his words, intended for the background of circulating clips. This is not a mere fairy tale, he stated. This is governance. And true governance means measuring promises by concrete actions. His definition was firmly planted amidst the forest of rapidly growing hashtags. Still, the opposing side of social media continued to proliferate. The hashtag #PeerStunt rose alongside hashtag KeepYourWord. One account sneered, "A few concerts and it's all over." Another replied, "Living wage is real." The two divergent edges of the internet continued to run in parallel. But now, clear checkpoints had been established: timelines, specific programs, scholarship names, listening session schedules. Truth had a designated place to land. The public relations team handed Victoria a roughly printed timeline. Quarter 1, scholarship applications open. Next month, 2 Harlem/Brooklyn concerts. 8 weeks, first DI training. Next week, no staff in photo, signs removed. Next quarter, new wage table implemented. Victoria initialed the corner. It was not legally binding to the public, but it served as a powerful self-imposed contract. A shareholder texted her, "Short-term loss." Victoria promptly replied, "Long-term risk reduction." She knew she would be compelled to prove this assertion in the upcoming quarterly report, but for the very first time, she felt a liberating breath of space beneath the crushing pressure. Marcus turned, extending his hand. Victoria shook it firmly. There was no pretense of a photo opportunity, no performative act. Cameras still pressed in closely, but in that shared clasp, they symbolically divided the immense weight between them. "Tomorrow, I will send you the schedule for the first session," Marcus stated. "I will invite the cleaning crews, the security personnel, the kitchen staff, the very individuals who routinely use the service elevator." Victoria nodded. "And I will personally take that elevator with them," she declared. The words escaped her lips before she could stop them, but they resonated with an undeniable rightness. A reporter flung one last question. "Do you consider this keeping your word?" Victoria looked directly into the camera lens. "I consider this keeping my word through fundamental reform," she replied. "We'll see you when we report progress." She set the microphone down. "No bow. Do first, bow later," was the unspoken sentiment. The room visibly loosened slightly, as if it had collectively exhaled. The social media storm still screamed fiercely outside, but at its very eye, a new framework had been established: scholarships, concerts, DI initiatives, improved wages and benefits, new policies, listening sessions, and a human values advisor. These were tangible commitments that would either take root and flourish or unequivocally expose who ultimately broke their word. Marcus looked at the piano for one final beat. He would not play again that night. The music had completed its profound work, reshaping the room so that meaningful words could finally enter. The remainder of the task would involve adherence to timelines and dedicated labor. And as the camera lights gradually dimmed, he observed Victoria walking towards Gloria first. She spoke quietly, clearly. "Miss Gloria," Victoria said, "thank you for reminding me with the truth." For the very first time, she addressed a staff member by name in front of the entire hall, not for the purpose of being recorded, but because it was simply the right thing to do. The night was not entirely over, but a new agreement had been forged between the realms of law and life. The rest was simple: keep the word. They stepped out of the meeting room just as the noise in the lobby reached its peak. Victoria walked half a step ahead, but as they reached the edge of the carpet, she slowed her pace to allow Marcus to draw level with her. The public relations manager handed her the microphone. She did not look at the teleprompter. "I am Victoria Whitmore," she began. "Tonight I was wrong, with Marcus Reed and with Gloria Johnson, with the manner in which I addressed you, my attitude, and the harm I inadvertently caused to people who should have been treated with respect." She paused for a moment. "I apologize unconditionally." The distinct click of camera shutters intensified as they moved closer. She continued, transitioning seamlessly from her verbal apology to a concrete, actionable plan. Specifically, a timeline: applications for the Reed Family Scholarship will open on the 15th of next month. The list of independently managed board members will be announced this weekend. She continued, keys for Dignity concerts: Harlem will host 2 Saturday nights next week at 6:30 p.m., and Brooklyn will host 1 Sunday next week at 5 p.m. Admission will be free, and all musicians and crew will receive full union pay. Victoria then detailed, mandatory DI training for all management will commence, lasting 8 weeks, with anonymous pre- and post-surveys conducted and a public report released next quarter. The no staff in photo policy officially ends tomorrow morning. Service elevators will be opened in non-security areas. All staff will be addressed by their proper names. Regarding compensation, she stated, wages and benefits. We will implement the city's living wage and add health stipends for night shifts by next quarter. She then outlined her personal commitment. Listening sessions. I will personally host these every Monday at 9 a.m. in the B1 break room. An anonymous feedback channel will go live tonight. She closed her notebook and looked straight ahead, her gaze resolute. Our cultural KPIs will now include turnover rate, internal satisfaction scores, the percentage of complaints resolved on time, and the pay gap by function. I am personally accountable for these numbers. A ripple of surprise spread through the hall, not in response to mere rhetoric, but at the explicit commitment to deadlines and measurable metrics. Davidson offered a small nod, like a final stamp of authenticity. Victoria lowered the microphone and turned towards the staff standing at the edges of the room. Miss Gloria, thank you, she said. Then, addressing the blue, white, and black uniforms of the staff, she added, tomorrow if I call anyone Buddy, please remind me by my own name. There were a few small, relieved laughs, but this relief possessed a quiet strength. The public relations manager signaled the tech team. Behind the stage, a large screen illuminated with a temporary poster, a black background with white text reading Keys for Dignity, featuring Marcus Reed's name and performance dates beneath. At the bottom, in small print, it read, a community concert series by Whitmore Grand. Admission free. There was no flashy logo, just enough information to be recognized. Victoria did not take the honorary seat reserved for her. She stepped off the platform and found a spot in the third row, positioning herself between a security guard and a waitress. She folded her phone face down on her lap. No more consulting dashboards. The room subtly shifted with that gesture. Her control lessened a notch, no longer pressing down upon the music. Marcus said nothing further. He remained seated at the piano, its lid closed by 1/3 to subtly sweeten the bass and soften the upper register. This one is for second chances, he said softly, and for those who have been made invisible. The melody he composed was not ornate. The opening motif consisted of 4 notes. Up a step, down a half step, then back home, reminiscent of the way people hesitate before making a decision. His left hand kept a steady time, like the quiet footsteps heard in a night shift hallway. His right hand gracefully traced a line so clean that one could distinctly hear the space between the phrases. Midway through the piece, he introduced a subtle shadow of summertime, not explicitly quoted in its entirety, but merely nodded to, then transformed it into a warm, harmonious passage that was not sorrowful. He composed for the present moment, not to revive an old resume. Victoria observed his hands, and for the first time, she did not perceive a performance, but rather labor. Labor, much like the cleaning shift she had so often walked past without truly seeing. Next to her, the security guard, who had once blocked Marcus, rested his hand on his knee, his thumb unconsciously rubbing an old wedding ring, then pulled his hand back quickly to avoid making any noise. The waitress seated to her left counted time with her eyes, a faint smile playing on her lips. In the coda, Marcus deliberately omitted any fireworks. He brought back the 4 opening notes, softer this time, like a room that had finally learned how to offer a proper apology. He lifted the pedal just before the last tone could cloud the sound. Silence descended once more, now feeling like a welcoming seat, just spacious enough for anyone to comfortably occupy. Applause followed, steady and full, yet not overwhelmingly loud. When it gradually faded, Marcus rose and offered a small bow, sufficient to express gratitude, not to repay a debt. He met Gloria's eyes. She nodded. Well done, Marcus. He met David Chen's gaze. Chen replied, see you in tomorrow's column. Victoria stood with everyone else. She turned to the guard. My name's Victoria. What's yours? Darren, he replied. Nice to work with you, Darren. Tomorrow, I'm taking the service elevator. You'll show me the way. Darren nodded, the corners of his mouth easing, a bit awkwardly, like someone who had just been handed back the very shape of being seen. A group of guests approached Gloria, inquiring about Monday's listening session. She took out her notebook, wrote down their names, and remarked, "Take service elevator B, but next week everyone will use the front door." It was half joke, half truth, enough to elicit a few genuine laughs from the group. The public relations team laid out a hastily printed roadmap on the check-in table, detailing timelines, points of contact, and an anonymous email address. Victoria's signature was scrolled in the corner, not for outward display, but as a mark of personal accountability. A few young staff members took photos, immediately sending them into their internal group chat. The first comment that popped up read, "Call me by my name." The second, "See you Monday." David Chin paused near the Keys for Dignity poster and remarked to a reporter, "The best script isn't a simplistic hero-villain redemption story. It's the understanding that after the final chord, we still have crucial work to do." It was the kind of line that, if dropped into the conclusion of a news segment, could potentially slow down the internet's pervasive overscripting instinct. Don't chase the ending. Wait for the report. As guests began to depart, the "No Staff in Photo" sign, tucked away in a hidden corner, was quietly taken down by the tech crew. They hesitated, looking to Victoria for confirmation. She nodded. "Remove it," she instructed, "and do not put it back up." The empty screw hooks were left visibly bare, serving as a stark, tangible scar of what had once been wrong. Marcus remained until last. He carefully covered the piano keys with the protective cloth, his hand resting a beat longer than strictly necessary, like someone gently closing the door to a cherished old home. Victoria stepped up to him. There was no microphone, no cameras present. "Thank you for not transforming me into a character in someone else's viral clip," she said quietly. "Tomorrow, if I falter, please remind me. I will. And if I genuinely uphold my word, remind me of that too." Marcus smiled. "I will," he affirmed, "so that others can witness it." Outside, New York descended another shade into the deepening night. Inside, people leaving the hall passed the cleaning crew beginning their shift. They greeted each other, calling each other by name. It was not perfect, but it was definitively moving in the right direction. The final, most impactful line of the night did not emanate from a microphone. It came from the way those people looked back at those they had once made invisible. Clearer, closer. Dignity possesses no uniform. It is imbued with courage. The night at the Whitmore Grand had concluded, but the profound lesson it imparted had just begun to unfold. Dignity has no uniform, it has courage. And a promise is only truly as valuable as the concrete actions that are taken to fulfill it.